joining us today. I am Beth Miner, and I am an associate professor of educational leadership at National Louis University. And today I'm honored to be talking to Clinton Alexander. Clinton, do you want to introduce yourself to us, please?
Yes. I am Clinton Alexander. I am the principal at Hillcrest High School, located in the south suburbs, and soon to be the new principal at Homewood Flossmoor High School in Homewood Flossmoor, Illinois, right up the street from Hillcrest. And so I'm in transition right now. I have one of my Vikings paraphernalia, so I'm splitting duties. I have my other shirt in the car when I have to go back over there later today because I have to give a commencement speech tomorrow. So we have graduation practice at the other school. So it's been that type of year for me. I'm excited to be approaching the end of my program, and I am a passionate educator that is an equity-centered individual. And so I've kind of dedicated my career to equitable practices and providing equity to all students, particularly minoritized students.
Great, thank you. Can you tell us a little bit more about the equity work that you have been doing and maybe some of the things that you're thinking about as you transition to your new school?
As it pertains to equity work, I've been really inundated here lately with providing, identifying hierarchical structures within academia and kind of just, deconstructing those things to allow the renewed mindsets of adults and increasing the awareness of adults to know that we're replicating things that we don't like per se.
Mhm.
And sometimes the comfort levels of adults who mean well outweigh their conventional wisdom sometimes. And so we know things aren't right, but sometimes comfort allows us to default to tradition.
Mhm.
And so my life's work for the past 5 years has been devoted to deconstructing the social hierarchies and racial hierarchies that are replicated from our society into education. So recently, my team and we developed some frameworks to address the teaching components and instructional components as it relates to minoritized students and how they learn. And using, action research models that are transformative, that really build buy-in from teacher leadership. And I think that was very monumental to foster teacher leadership in developing a tool to actually instruct kids in a culturally responsive way that also promotes cognitive rigor.
Mhm.
So, that's what we've been doing here lately. So for the past 2 years, we've been working on instructional delivery methods and engagement techniques that are culturally responsive. And we've been using that to implement our accelerated learning strategies and increasing rigor within minoritized classrooms.
That sounds great. So you have a framework that you developed with your team, right? And it's called RAP. Can you
Yes,
tell us a little bit more about how that framework was developed and then what each of those letters stands for?
absolutely. So it was developed. We had a teacher committee, 5 teachers and 2 administrators, including myself. And so we framed up the issue that we were having. We were seeing levels of engagement not where we need them to be, and we thought that they could be better. And so we identified through the cycle of inquiry, we identified the issue. And that was the challenge, like keeping our students engaged academically in order for us to increase the rigor and shorten the achievement gap and the opportunity gap. So the issues were decreased engagement and the opportunity gap. And we utilized data and we established goals and practices that we were able to assess and adjust. And so the feedback loop just kept going after the action research process began. And the teachers kind of led the whole charge by analyzing the type ones and twos, using teacher testimonies and personal experiences. We used an assortment of data to kind of inform the what, and then how. We developed the how together. And so through like 8 sessions together, We kind of developed the RAP framework in which they kind of align with domains 2 and 3 of Danielson, but they're culture responsive based, they're equity centered. And so the W and the R, the W is word acquisition through common programs and structures. So this works on the efficacy piece of teachers, because if we have the shared structures and programs and vocabulary through word acquisition, the retention of students as it pertains to academic vocabulary, they hear it,
Mhm.
and it's that repetition kind of grows the dendrites a little bit so that they can understand the verb, and they won't get caught up on the verb more so than the skill.
Mhm.
And so through word acquisition, common programs and understandings as far as professional development, we were able to develop that groupthink and the language that we needed. The R was respond to relate. And this was kind of spurred by the Illinois culturally responsive teaching and leading standards. So we looked at those standards that were designed for post-secondary institutions, and we said,
Mhm.
hey, this is what certified individuals have to know coming out. How can we leverage this information to kind of edify our practices in the classroom? So we kind of picked some anchor practices from within there and paraphrase those into our own. And we use those as markers to connect and build relationships with students. And so that is kind of like the classroom environment component. And then on the
Mhm.
other side, the A and the P, those are the cognitive applications. So the RAP is when the sociocultural theory meets cognitive applications to springboard cognitive rigor. So the A and the P, you have the asset-based approaches. So as opposed to the deficit-based approach that deals with the gaps that we know that are there already, we have the asset-based approaches that affirm our students through their gifts and skill sets and language to kind of make sure that we can keep the amygdala from hijacking their thought process through stereotype threat and all types of condescension that is within typical education. And then we have the P, which is produce 21st century products of relevance. And so this is kind of spurred by the research of Michael Fullen and Tony Wagner as it pertains to 21st century skills that are necessary for students to be competitive in the workforce and beyond. So it's kind of a conglomeration of best practices, but we kind of, simplified it into two sides. We have the sociocultural theory, which connects, and then the cognitive applications we use to accelerate learning. And that's where we are with that.
Great. And can you tell me a little bit more about the changes that you've seen in your teachers and in your students once you've started to use this framework?
Yes. So through classroom observations, just going and doing pop-ins and stuff, uh, I noticed that the engagement level, just anecdotally, I was looking at my feedback notes to the teachers, and I was noticing a deeper level of engagement.
Hmm.
You know, and so that's anecdotal. It wasn't really validated by anything, but it was a feeling that I got. And it was a very plausible interaction between and respectful interaction between teachers and students, um, which was slightly noticeable. But what really opened my eyes was when I started to see the student achievement numbers,
Yeah.
and then I looked at the discipline data as well. And when I looked at that, I was like, wow, this is actually impacting our learning community. So, after implementing the RAP consistently and kind of meeting through the action research process and adjusting and reflecting, we noticed a significant improvement within the classrooms that were using the RAP framework.
Hmm.
And then we also saw a substantial amount of recidivism reductions in discipline. So there was less recidivisms in school discipline because of this framework, because we had more kids engaged. So
Hmm.
that was really resounding and kind of qualified and validated the anecdotal notes that I had with my walkthroughs.
Hmm. Do you foresee your framework being translatable to other contexts? Or, you talked about part of the process was really the teacher's engagement and the teacher's action research. Do you, when you think about your new school, is this something that you will, look to applying in the new school, or is it part of you'll think about the process and kind of start from there and see what emerges based on the context?
I think that's a great question. I firmly believe that the the research that we use as a committee to kind of guide our practices are customary to any population because
Mhm.
it's a culturally responsive base. So through the vehicle of cultural proficiency, we're using best practices to meet the people in front of us. And so, in my case at Hillcrest, we have predominantly Black children, but this also can apply to a diverse population upstate or
Yeah.
in the North Shore or in the
Hmm.
West suburbs, right? Or in the rural South in
Hmm.
Illinois. So I
Hmm.
believe that the culture dictates the practice. So as opposed to having a customary boilerplate curriculum, activities, modalities, and methodologies, I believe that if we utilize the culture as a springboard to identify the backgrounds of our clientele, to leverage, a deeper level of engagement and relationship building, that's the building block to cognitive applications that are relevant in modern society and in the 21st century workforce. So I think, in short, that it can be utilized anywhere, I believe.
Hmm.
Yeah, I do.
And one of the things that you mentioned was the culturally responsive teaching and leading standards for the state of Illinois. And, thinking about what institutions of higher education need to be doing to help prepare future teachers and future leaders. What advice would you have for them in terms of thinking about how to graduate culturally responsive teachers and culturally responsive school leaders or district leaders as well?
I think that we all come from different walks of life, and I think that being culturally responsive starts with us. So I firmly believe that there should be a level of implicit bias that is in depth.
Mhm.
We have to identify the implicit biases that we have. That's what makes us human. To deny that we have them makes us ignorant,
Mhm.
but to actually pronounce that we have them and announce that we have them makes us informed because we're able to make decisions based on the biases that we have.
Mhm.
And so with that being said, I believe that the program should include, unpacking yourself, unraveling
Mhm.
yourself to understand how your identity can impact your learning community. So I believe also, I believe that the enrichment of culturally responsive practices and pedagogy needs to really be rooted in the outcomes. It has to be outcome based because
Mhm.
it's not just to feel good. Oh, I want to be warm and fuzzy with minoritized children who don't have. It's more so utilizing, you're disarming our history and the customary practices to connect with kids on a deeper level to springboard into academic rigor. So if we never reach the academic rigor component,
Mhm.
then the culturally responsive endeavor has failed.
Mhm.
And I believe that the other side of cultural responsiveness is not talked about as much as the warm and fuzzy side, because the warm and fuzzy side is a gateway to reaching the academic rigor component. And we
Mhm.
have, a lot of research out there by different experts. Zaretta Hammond has a really good piece with the culturally responsive teaching in the brain. It kind of talks about how we utilize that connection to springboard into her ready for rigor framework kind of talks about things like that to springboard into academic rigor. That's what it's all
Mhm.
about, academic
Mhm.
rigor, and we want to shorten the achievement and opportunity gaps.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about the opportunity gaps in some of my own work. I've looked at the opportunity gap, and not only so there's multiple layers to it, right? And this is, I think, what you're getting at. There's the access to opportunities, but then there's also the quality within the opportunities as well that can create inequalities. So if you don't have that academic rigor that you're talking about, yeah, you might have access to opportunities, but there's not that quality piece.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, we have to look at the efficacy of what we're doing. We just can't go through the motions because we
Hmm.
have a lot of individuals who are depending on equitable support.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, equity renders outcomes. And unless you're getting the outcomes you're looking for, you have to question whether or not you're implementing equitable practices. So
Hmm.
we have to stop with well, we can't stop at the understanding of, hey, I implemented these practices. No, did we receive the outcomes that we were looking for because of the equitable practices? So we have to focus on the inputs and the outputs.
Right. And a
Yeah.
lot of what you're talking about too requires tough conversations, right? You've talked about implicit bias and you've talked about critically examining those outcomes to know if what you're doing is really making the changes that you want to see. How do you have those tough conversations? I mean, I imagine in the work that you did with your committee that there were some tough conversations as you're analyzing what you're seeing, what you're going to do, talking about implicit bias. How do you have those conversations?
You know what? That's a great question because it's a delicate balance because nothing is static. We have a dynamic reality. And so, as a leader, I had to have a foundation of a good connection and I had to have the relational trust already built. Because if I was not a trustworthy individual, I couldn't lead the conversation.
Right.
So, courageous conversations without credibility, without ethics, is virtually impossible. So you have to have a baseline of credibility to start
Mhm.
that conversation. They have to deem you a safe space. And
Mhm.
that comes through your platform and your experiences that you put out there.
Mhm.
Because the adaptive challenge of changing the hearts and minds of people will require their trust of you as a leader.
Right.
And then from that point, framing things up through data and objective conversations, non-biased conversations, taking the emotions and modifiers out of your jargon and
Mhm.
looking at the data to show the inequalities, inequitable, programs and data sources that we have to validate the necessity of the initiatives that we desire to launch for equity. And I
Mhm.
believe that once you have the ethics and the credibility and you show the logic of, hey, this is the data that shows that there's an egregiousness out there,
Yeah.
human beings will be human beings because I have a faith and a conviction that people will do the right thing if you put them in the right situation.
Mhm.
And I believe that with the logic through data and the credibility of the leader, I believe that together we can make the right decision to be equitable for students who really need us.
Mhm.
I
And
was
so
thinking of something.
oh yeah,
I
no, go
was
ahead.
thinking of something. You asked me about preparing our professionals to
Yeah.
be equipped for responsive practices. We always say that we have to know the backgrounds of our students.
Yeah.
Okay. But I believe that is more than a notion because to know the background, it takes intentionality, it takes
Mhm.
vulnerability.
Right.
So it would require one to be unfamiliar. And see, that's very hard to do in a profession that has to be competent in everything. So it's like you're telling teachers and you're telling competent professionals to be incompetent for a minute and be vulnerable to be
Yeah.
unknowing about these students that you have to teach.
Yeah.
So there has to be a pendulum that swings from, tradition to the unknown, the unknown realm of trying to learn about students. And I think that we really need to walk our teachers down that path of empathizing with students. And we just can't say, hey, know the background. We say, know the background, know the background, know the background. But we need to have a methodology to allow those professionals to learn the background. It has to be a formula. And we just
Mhm.
can't keep saying, hey, know the background.
Right. And then thinking about how the school and district leaders are modeling that for the teachers, right? It's not just the teachers who need to have that vulnerability as well, I would imagine.
Mhm.
Right?
Absolutely. Yes, indeed.
But what advice would you give aspiring leaders who see inequities, really want to start digging into equity work? How do they start?
I think after you get the notion to want to be equitable, you have to inform yourself because there's a counterintelligence that has a very, very unique and kind of weird energy out there to kind of, there's a counterforce out there. So to every equity person, you'll have, maybe 2 to 3 inequitable people that are either overt or covert.
Mhm.
And as you cross those enemy lines, and I hate to use this analogy as combat, but um, as you do that, you'll get a lot of pushback. And if you're ill-equipped to utilize the theory, and if you're ill-equipped to validate the necessity of being equitable, you could easily be defeated in your quest to provide equity for your students, and it'll begin to be frustrating work. So I would say, once the will is there to change, I believe that the literacy has to be increased,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
then it also has to be accompanied with a changed leadership mindset of understanding what pushback looks like, uh, how to decipher between a technical challenge and adaptive challenges, how to build relational trust to ensure you have the political capital necessary to make certain moves within, policy reform
Mhm.
within your district, you know, um, and your executive leadership. So I think that there's definitely a recipe, and it
Mhm.
starts with literacy, informing
Mhm.
self. You have to have the will, and then you have to create the allegiance to uh, to to enact change.
Great. Well, you have given us a lot of important things to think about and actions to move forward in terms of informing ourselves. I want to thank you for taking time to talk with us today, and just want to say, are there any last parting words you would like to share?
You know what? I just I enjoyed this opportunity. I look forward to collaborating with professionals here and abroad to just kind of bring equity into the classroom. I think that this is a really unique moment in educational history where we have more people on board to bring equitable services in the classroom than ever before. So it excites me to understand that the population of equitable agents um, is increasingly available today. So I'm excited and looking forward to continuing the work that we're doing.
Great. Thank you so much.